All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. We do educational videos over here, and mainly we focus on great theories of everything, all-encompassing theories, cosmologies, grand unified theories that can give you a holistic worldview, help you with your paradigm shifting, your awakening to 5D consciousness, in your quest for better spiritual, mental, and physical health. Today, we've also focused on the obscure, so probably things that you haven't heard of or don't know much about. And today is our 76th video that we've done on the book by Daniel Ingram called Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha. And again, this is not so much a book on Buddhism as it is about certain aspects of Buddhism, what he calls the core teachings. Not to throw out the baby with the bathwater, as they say over in England, back in the early modern era, but that there are some core teachings of Buddhism that are very useful, really science and technologies that you don't have to be a Buddhist to be able to take advantage of these things. You don't have to believe in Buddhism. I personally don't even believe that the Buddha existed, but there is a tradition that goes back 2,500 years of meditation in Buddhism, and the monks that have spent all their time meditating have put together a lot of maps, and these things are useful if you are, especially if you are a meditator or if you are thinking about becoming a meditator. So that's really why and Daniel Ingram has been over to the Far East many, many times, doing meditation retreats and picking their brains, and then he comes back to the United States and writes this book in English, basically, just laying it all out for us. He went down a lot of blind alleys, a lot of dead-end streets, and he's hoping that he can help us avoid those things. And so he's pretty much of a geek also, so he really geeks out on details and maps and things that you can really use if you put your mind to it. But he does say that you're probably not going to have that much success in meditation unless you really work on your technique and you put in a lot of time. It kind of has to be your job. Now, it doesn't have to be your job full time, but it kind of has to be your vacation, so he says that, you need to go on these retreats, whether it's over there or wherever, and meditate for many, many hours a day for many, many days in a row. That's where you get the real results. And so that is, something that you might have to plan for. You plan your vacation. You don't have to go over to Burma, but you can say, I'm going to have 2 weeks off coming up, and I'm going to do nothing but meditate and, maybe, just take care of the daily chores or whatever. And I'm going to try to meditate, 8 to 12 to 15 to 18 hours a day. And then that's where you can really make the progress. So most people aren't willing to do that. I don't know that I'm willing to do that, but I am at least going to be thinking about it and going to be trying to plan my life out so that I can put together a chunk of time where I can at least have the option to do something like that. Okay, we're in the middle of a very long chapter here on enlightenment models. So different schools of Buddhism have different standards for what an enlightened person looks like or feels like or, acts like. And Ingram has deconstructed a lot of these and reconstructed a few of them. But he pretty much disagrees with the vast majority of them, and really, says that an enlightened person pretty much just looks like anybody else, but their mind works subtly in different ways. They are more in harmony with reality, what's going on right in front of us. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to glow or that they're going to be free of emotions or anything like that. Also, just as background, he breaks down Buddhism to 3 trainings. This is an original, but the training in morality, and then the 2 trainings in meditation: concentration meditation and insight meditation. Concentration meditation is meditation on an object, and this can take you to vistas that are very exotic and blissful, and kind of keep you going. But insight meditation is opening up to your 5 senses and your mental impressions and investigating the sensations for the 3 characteristics, which are impermanence, dissatisfactoriness, and no self. Our sensations are not us, they are not satisfactory, and they are not permanent. In fact, they are arising and passing away all the time. And by investigating that and realizing this, we go kind of around the stages of insight and kind of awaken ourselves by degrees. So that's kind of like I think, one of the central things that he talks about in this book. Now, we're talking about, let's see, what's the section that we're on? It's called the meaning model. So this is a model of enlightenment that talks about the different meaning. We'll probably figure it out once I get started here. As all the traditions seem to have a monolithic confidence that their meaning structure is the optimal one, conflicts are inevitable, as we see again and again when the various traditions interact. 2 traditions that agree almost completely on teachings related to sensate clarity can still be perpetually at each other's throats when it comes to questions of optimal meaning. Most traditions generally don't think along the lines of optimal when it relates to their stock recommended meanings. It does say stock recommended meanings. They just have their meanings, forgetting that they have those meanings for some hopefully good reasons. Obviously, this sort of pragmatism as a lens through which to view meaning structures is itself a statement of meaning in some way. But please forgive this point, since if you throw out pragmatism, then pragmatically things get dicey in practical terms. Most of the traditions don't seem to have the breadth of perspective to sit back, examine what their meaning structures and stock recommended goals and interpretations of reality were supposed to actually do, or to remember this when interacting with other traditions and specific individuals. Pragmatism is informed by statements of value. What is worthwhile? What is valuable? What is most important? Clearly, I believe that sensate clarity and using this to awaken to the specific sensate truths that remove that tangled, painful space warp at the center of perception is valuable. In this, I put value on sensate clarity as a high ideal. There are other explicit skills, perspectives, and techniques that I value, as should be obvious by now. You have similar lists of values, and I place value on knowing what those are, since knowing what we value leads to the natural question of what leads to the things we value. and then this can lead naturally to doing those things that lead to the things we value. However, some of this is clearly very individual, very personal, and conditioned by causes and conditions about which we likely have little to no awareness, as the psychologists know all too well. Which do you value more, dispassion or engagement with the world to save all beings? Do you value love or equanimity more? Do you value joy or clarity about suffering? Do you value gritty humanity or refined idealism? These are key questions that superficially divide whole traditions which otherwise would agree on and delight in many other points of shared practice and experience. Clearly, there are answers that involve various combinations of apparent opposites, shades of gray, and all the other nuanced aspects of mature metaphilosophy. However, somewhere along the way, for reasons we may never really sort out, we became wired to lean more strongly towards one side or the other of these sorts of initially dualistic appearing questions. Personal predilections are issues of personality and personality styles, while not perfectly fixed, are powerful karmic conditionings that are not easily changed. It is true that as we age, grow, and develop, we may come to view these questions differently than we did at various previous points along the path, and our honest answers may actually change moment to moment and circumstance to circumstance. That said, certain trends do tend to persist throughout our lives, given that personality styles and relationships to these sorts of questions of value and meaning are often relatively stable. I would advocate for traditions which wish to be broadly applicable to make room for both sides of these debates. Clearly, in some way, the traditions are aware that by taking a strongly one-sided stand, they will often alienate those whose personality style is different from their own. They then often forget this, viewing those on the other side of these perennial questions as somehow inferior to them, despite the clear evidence that smart, wise, mature, reasonable people may hold apparently different views from them on key topics of meaning. All that setup accomplished, we now come to the meaning models in a more explicit way. Most of the traditions explicitly state that awakened beings will hold certain specific values as more valuable than others, interpret reality through specific meaning structures, and in general agree with the position staked out by that tradition regarding the core perennial questions about the meaning of life. They will often then use the corollary of this view to confidently state that those who hold contradictory views regarding key spiritual values and meanings are obviously inferior to those who have practiced in their own tradition. We can reasonably presume that most of this is based on the notion that their views are somehow optimal for this life, and that the experiment has been done decisively, and their view is the very best. Here's the thing. I can't for certain tell you that some tradition isn't right when it comes to answering these questions. I personally am quite certain that I don't have enough definitive data to make such a claim about my own tradition or about any other tradition. It is possible that such a data set exists and is incontrovertible, but I haven't seen it yet. If you have seen such perfect data that such a perfect data set that optimally proves the supremely practical complete canon of relative views for all practitioners in all times and places, please let me know. Until then, perhaps we should all keep an open mind regarding perfect certainty about optimal meanings and values and keep doing the experiment as best we can, as this is likely to allow us to get a lot more out of the efficacious spiritual technologies developed by the various traditions and enjoy the conversation about those technologies a lot more. Here I clearly value efficacy, communication, and enjoyment in such matters, just in case my obvious biases aren't clear. If you value something else, I hope it works out well for you based on whatever value system you hold. Still, beware of entangling nets of views that bind you up in fear and conflict, as that may cause needless suffering, particularly when it comes to traditions, and I will try my best to be similarly mindful when I can. This is not easy, as I'm sure you have noticed. Okay, this section is called the three yanas, Y-A-N-A-S. While I am generally a diehard fan of the Theravada, I have great appreciation for much of the rest of Buddhism and the world's other great mystical traditions. In that spirit, I offer what follows. Traditional Tibetan training is broken down into at least three yanas, or vehicles: the Hinayana, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana. These correspond very nicely to the developmental needs of practitioners at various stages of the simple model presented earlier. Hinayana is a set of techniques and practices that closely resembles many of the traditional trainings of the Theravada, and these are often conflated for this reason. There are some very loose historical relationships between the two that I do not wish to go into. The Hinayana's emphasis is on basic morality, stabilizing the mind, and investigating the three characteristics. That is, all the fundamental practices and emphases that I mentioned in part 1. It is designed to get a person to the first stage of awakening, or first path, which the Tibetans would call third path in the Tibetan five-path model, or attaining the first bhumi. Getting to the next stage of the simple model, or third path, involves a deep appreciation of interconnectedness in real time and a willingness to surrender it. The Mahayana path provides methods for understanding this with strong emphasis on benefiting all beings and on the emptiness of phenomena. The Bodhisattva vow, a fundamental part of the Mahayana path, not only expresses a deep willingness to surrender to and understand interconnectedness, it also, if well practiced, encourages practitioners to stay engaged with this world and avoid turning their backs on the suffering of unawakened beings. One of the interesting things about the Mahayana is that you must have a certain foundation of practice and insight to practice at that level. Unfortunately, just as studies show that most people think they are above average, many people who identify as Mahayana Buddhists don't necessarily have the realizations in common with the fundamental vehicle, Hinayana, or realization of the three characteristics. Nor do they necessarily realize that to really practice the Mahayana, you have to have some strong understanding of relative and ultimate bodhicitta, the deep aspiration to work for the benefit and full awakening of all beings, and a direct experience of what awakening actually involves. So if you don't have that, strongly consider doing the foundational practices that might get you that understanding, and consider that the Theravada provides a degree of efficacious technical sophistication that can make that process much easier. I personally find applying the Mahayana motivation and Theravada methods quite empowering. Not that very similar motivating factors don't exist in the Theravada. To get to the next stage, we must completely understand the intrinsic luminosity of all transient phenomena without exception. The Vajrayana path, with its emphasis on intrinsic luminosity and tantric techniques that work with the awakened nature of the fullness of the emotional range and the richness of this human life, fits very well with the needs of those trying to gain understanding that emptiness is form. Dzogchen and Mahamudra teachings also explicitly emphasize the luminosity of transient phenomena and that all things are of the nature of truth. I absolutely love the book Clarifying the Natural State by Dakpo Tashi Namgyal, who is one hard-hitting, pithy, no-nonsense yogi and takes on these topics with an ease, power, and clarity rarely found anywhere. And that book is called Clarifying the Natural State. I'm still a big fan of the Theravada, but I have a strong appreciation for the tailored beauty of the three yana system of the Tibetans. It has an uncanny sophistication and explains part of what happens developmentally, even if you are following Theravada techniques or those of another wisdom tradition. I'm also a big fan of Zen, particularly its strong emphasis on keeping things down to earth, as articulated in the well-known saying, after the ecstasy, the laundry. As always, it is not the tradition which is important, but that it works for you. In this spirit, there is a yana called the Ekayana, the one vehicle, which comes to us from texts such as the Lotus Sutra and the Avatansaka Sutra. In this view, all the Buddhist teachings are part of the same vehicle, and all may be drawn on to help us on our paths, P-A-T-H-S. This is very much the spirit in which I have proceeded, and I am grateful to those who promote this integrative view. It is not that discriminating between the three yanas, or 9 as the Nyingma school describes, has no value as it does, but that we can keep a broader perspective than these might allow so that we can benefit ourselves and those around us by adopting terminology and techniques appropriate to various individuals and situations. Further, people who appreciate the Ekayana perspective are typically less fundamentalist and provincial in their approach to Buddhism and indeed to all spiritual traditions. Further, what happens in real life is that at times we retreat from the world and develop core meditative and spiritual trainings. At times, we feel compelled to go and help the world, and at times, we are ill or incapacitated to some degree, and we hope the world helps us instead. Thus, those who do actual reality testing will find that anyone who claims to follow a specific yana instead typically oscillates between the stereotypical perspectives of them all at various times, both in terms of attitude and function. In this way, having a flexible attitude can allow us to assess our actual changing needs, capabilities for helping ourselves and others, and our current circumstances and heart, so that we adopt all of these valid perspectives on our relationship to meditative training and on making the world a better place. Speaking of engagement with the world and on making the world a better place, check out the works of J. Michelson, particularly his book Evolving Dharma, Meditation, Buddhism, and the Next Generation of Enlightenment. Perhaps a bit tangentially, A yana I might advise some caution reading regarding is what I call the wikiyana, which involves people's tendency to inform themselves or practice from stuff they find on the internet, devoid of the other conducive structures of community and context that help support these practices. Now, don't misunderstand me. The internet has provided staggering amounts of useful Dharma information beyond anything previously seen in history and made it available to people who would otherwise never have been able to access it. When I was coming up in this stuff, one literally could have read every Dharma book that was easily available and then exhaust the obscure stuff through interlibrary loans. These days, that would be nearly impossible, much less could one keep up with the staggering amount of hyper-proliferative online Dharma information in other forms. The Wikiyana, coupled with good spiritual friends and good practice, can be extremely powerful, reaching people in numbers previously unthinkable to everyone except perhaps the guys who came up with the boomies. And this is a great thing. Online Dharma can also be a massive, distracting, overwhelming time suck that detracts from focusing on core practices and simple truths. So, if you follow the Wikiyana, find people to hang out with who have benefited from the great and qualified teachers who do exist, friends who know the path well for themselves, and please also strongly consider finding out more about the supports that are found in the original traditions drawing on those. Remember to focus your practice and beware of getting entangled in the ever addictive and sometimes crazy world of online Dharma. Also be careful with what online Dharma you practice and discuss it with ones who are doing those techniques, so you get a sense of what they lead to. Some practices done out of context or without reasonable foundational practices can be ineffective, or worse, can cause strange and unwanted effects due to misconceptions, misapplications, and can even be extremely dangerous. More on that later. The information in this book is among the sources that have significant danger potential, as mentioned many times so far, and will be mentioned many more. Finally, back to the maps. The non-duality models are the only models of awakening that hold up without apology, qualification, or exception. The rest of the models have serious problems, though each do contain partial truths, however inadequately conveyed given our cultural context and the social complexity within which we exist. Given sufficient experience of the real world, those who believe in literal interpretations of such models as the limited emotional range models and limited possible action models will either, 1, be forced to conclude that no living being meets their definitions of enlightenment, 2, be forced into a dark corner of borderline psychotic rationalizations of what actually happens, or 3, be forced to have a very rude awakening indeed. Pun intended. To my mind, there is only one thing worse than students getting caught up in the dogma of the worst of the models, and that is realized teachers insisting on those models. Just as it is disappointing when those with long retreat resumes but no fundamental insight want to encourage faith in their beautiful tradition by appearing to know more than they do. It is doubly disappointing when realized beings get caught in these archaic models, acting as if the models worked in the fantasy land way that some people think they do. I know exactly where they are coming from and how tempting this is, but I dream of a day when such things never happen. The Dharma world would be so much better off if teachers were honest about what realization is and ain't, both with themselves and with their students. Don't think this sort of dishonesty doesn't occur. I have seen some of my very best and most realized teachers fall into this trap and have also done so myself more times than I can count. Learn from those who have had to learn the hard way and are willing to admit this. Okay, this section is called Ditching Our Stuff versus Ditching the Split. While these two models are stated implicitly earlier, I thought I would summarize them again to make sure that I have made this important point clear. There are models of awakening that involve getting rid of all of our stuff. That is, our issues, flaws, quirks, pains, negative emotions, traumas, personalities, cultural baggage, childhood scars, relationship difficulties, insecurities, fears, strange notions, illnesses, etc. Such models underlie most of the mainstream ideals of spiritual attainment. What is funny is that lots of people spend so much time working so hard to get rid of all of their stuff, but think that awakening, which is ditching the illusion of the separate self and the dualistic split, is largely unattainable. I have exactly the opposite view, that ditching the split is very attainable, but getting rid of all of our stuff while in this mammalian body is completely impossible. When I hear about those who wish to attain a type of Buddhahood that is defined by not having any stuff in any form, regardless of how it is perceived by them, I usually think to myself that the countless eons they usually claim are necessary to accomplish this are a gross underestimation. The real world is about stuff, and awakening is about the real world. What is nice about ditching the split, aside from the fact that it can be done, is that now we can naturally, gently be friends with our stuff, even if our stuff sucks. We can work with it as well as can be expected and from a place of great clarity and understanding. Stage by stage, ditching the split makes all the slow but necessary healing so much easier, or at least more tolerable and less miserable. Thus, take the time to work with your stuff, or try not to, as you like. Our stuff is here,